Good evening. My name is Johnny Muhammad, and I'm with the Street Peace Coalition. I'm here with my guest, Minister Michael Muhammad. We've started a new season. This is our fall season of the Street Peace Coalition, and we're coming to you live here on CAN TV. We want to have some serious discussion about the things that are going on in our community that are creating violence and conflict, which the Street Peace Coalition was founded in order to address, to help ordinary citizens and individuals who were formerly in gang life and antisocial behavior to become a part of helping to solve the problem in our troubled communities. So that's really what this program is about, is really to helping the public get involved in activities to help us really address the violence and mayhem that's going on in our communities. So we have the founder, one of the co-founders of the Street Peace Coalition with us today, Minister Michael Muhammad, and he's going to kind of walk us through what the Street Peace Coalition is, what the organization was structured and founded on, and what are some of the tactics and strategies that the organization uses in order to address some of the violence and conflict in our communities, so that we don't have not just the kind of murder and carnage on our streets, but so that we can at least bring about some peace and harmony in our neighborhoods and in our households. So, Minister Michael Muhammad, why don't you tell us exactly how was the Street Peace Coalition started?
Yes. Well, first, let me thank you, Brother Johnny, for being our host, and let me thank the audience, our viewing audience, for tuning in. And I always like to start each show by thanking the Creator for giving us the opportunity to serve our people, our community, and giving us the opportunity to bring a measure of truth, a measure of light in a dark space. And the black community is suffering from a lack of knowledge, a lack of light, a lack of truth, and above all, a lack of self-love. And so we thank Almighty God for the opportunity as students of all of our great ones, all of our great elders and ancestors, and personally being a student of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. It is a blessing and an honor to carry forward that tradition. Having said that, to answer your question, the Street Peace Coalition is the outgrowth of our work in our ministry, Torchlight Interfaith Ministries, which is our religious or spiritual ministry. In that ministry, we developed that ministry back in 2003, and a large part of our ministry included emphasis on outreach in the community to the underserved of our people. And so in the culture of Islam and in the culture of Christian evangelism, there's an axiom that is attributed to Muslims that says, you know, if the mountain won't come to Muhammad, Muhammad will go to the mountain. Well, that's a principle, even though it's communicated in Islamic kind of terms. What it is saying is that if we are disciples of Jesus, if we are disciples of Muhammad, if we are disciples of Buddha, if we are disciples of our great illuminaries, then it's okay to set up shop in a brick and mortar location and share the word and the wisdom of God and the warnings of God with the people. But the truth is, most of the people are not inside of brick and mortar. Most of the people are out on the porch. They're standing on the block. They're in the park. They're in the alley. They're in the hood. They're in the street. And so we have always had a heavy emphasis on going out to try to reach our people. And so out of that effort, my work I have a long history of work with street organizations that goes back to my teenage years, and so I've had the burden and the blessing of always being concerned about trying to inspire and motivate and challenge our street organizations, our youth organizations, but more specifically our street organizations, to understand their potential, their power, and the responsibility that Almighty God would place on them to evolve, to grow, to come out of a dark condition into a light condition, to come out of a ethos of crime, and understand that they are they are the power of their unity, the power of organization, the power of having structure, rules, law, regulation, leadership, chain of command. All of that carries tremendous potential for the protection, survival, and the development of black people. And so this has been a big part of my service and my ministry, like I said, since I was about 16 years old.
Now we talking about like the mid to late 80s, right?
Right. So so we've been on that path for quite some time. So out of that, we at a certain point in 2000 and about 2012, we started having some meetings. We decided to have some ad hoc meetings with those involved with street life and street organizations, just to talk about what are some of the ideals that we could come up with to have an impact on this latest outgrowth of violence, which is a little different from anything we've seen in the 80s, the 90s, the early 2000s. There's a different type of violence that has emerged. And so out of that, we had a group of about 40 to 50, primarily men, but some sisters, who came in the room weekly. Everybody has some background with relationship to street organizations. And we began to wrestle with this condition. And so out of those efforts came the Street Peace Coalition. Okay. And we were challenged to put forward a structure, put forward a strategy, put forward a vision. And so we accepted that challenge from the group, and we moved forward. And so we're here today as the Street Peace Coalition. We have not ceased in our efforts since that time, and we've been working on our strategy, our vision, and trying to craft a strategy that's unique, different from any other violence intervention or prevention group that is operating in the community. And so that's how we came into existence.
Great. Now I know one of the central concerns that people have said in terms of being able to look back at some of the impact that gangs have had in the city 20 years ago compared to now is that they've noticed that there has been a breakdown of structure. Not that we're endorsing any kind of criminality, but at least in the absence of formal organized programs in our community, we all recognize that young people group together, and then in that grouping, there seem to be some differences between the kind of street organization life 20 or 25 years ago compared to the way it is now. I certainly don't remember as much carnage and as much killing. I know maybe a couple of weeks ago they found a young man on the west side. I think he had been shot and killed and thrown in the garbage can and burned. So you never heard about that kind of horrific carnage that took place, that's taking place now. And can you kind of speak to what do you see as the differences between the way the local organizations that may be operating in our neighborhoods are behaving now as opposed to years and years ago?
Well, the fundamental difference is that the federal government was effective in developing a strategy to target not just singular individuals, but groups of leaders in these various organizations. And so, once that trend happened, this mega indictment trend that pretty much started with the El Rookins, where they indicted 40 or so of the top leadership, that broke down the structure. And then a few years later, they did the same thing to the Growth and Development Organization. It was at least 30 or 40 of those individuals indicted at the same time. And then they went through each major branch of these organizations and did a similar mega indictment of 20 to 40 at a time. So that was mass disruption of a legitimate structure that had a hierarchy, a chain of command that promoted organization around some type of constitution, some type of ethos or creed, some type of belief system that at least 75 to 85% of that was tied to something we could recognize as spiritual or positive teaching. And so when you combine that effect with other social engineering practices of the United States government with regards to the proliferation of crack cocaine, with the negative laws passed during the Clinton administration in terms of 3 strikes, you're out, mandatory sentencing, federal housing practices and policies that castigated 2-parent homes, the change in the welfare structure for those who were at the bottom of society who needed aid and assistance for their daily survival. When you combine the overall blanket effect of the agenda of the federal government, then you see that there was a breakdown not only of structure and real leadership, there was the infusion of a drug epidemic that now you had grandmothers involved in the use and distribution of crack cocaine. You had mothers involved in that. You had parents now who fell victim to this socially engineered condition with the drug epidemic, and then the extension of the so-called war on drugs. And so there was a breakdown domestically of the family. So when you talk about the positive reinforcement, cultivation, or habilitation you get from having a strong mother, grandmother, father, grandfather, uncles, and all of that was dramatically reduced and traumatized in that same period from the mid 80s all the way really up until today. And so the violence we see today, while there were more murders in parts of the 90s, it was a different type of crime. The crime today is extremely drug fueled. It's fueled by young men who don't have the advantage of a strong, positive, forceful male figure, and so their emotional profile has become effeminized, and so they respond to pressure and insult, and they respond to negative social interaction with extreme hyperbolic behavior. Their level of anger or rage, their ability to handle a disagreement, or somebody liking your girlfriend, or your girlfriend liking somebody else, all of these things now erupt into gunplay. And so there's the random killing of innocent civilians who have nothing to do with your dispute, but on top of that, there is nobody who can hold the young men accountable, because when there was structure, if grandmama's got a bullet through her window, you could go to leadership, and leadership would make whoever did that accountable for that, if you knew who to go to. If there was a drug spot set up in front of your auntie's house, if you knew the right leader, that leader would have at least have that drug spot moved to a more neutral location, to where it wouldn't violate the boundaries between those people in the game and what we call civilians.
Yeah, there's a few things that you said that really kind of jump out at me. One is that, a lot of people point to how the murder rate was higher, even though it was higher in the late 80s and early 90s. But I think a lot of people fail to realize that the population in Chicago was almost 3 times what it is now. So it kind of stands to reason that there would be a higher murder rate. The other thing, too, is just as I heard you describe the conditions under which the communities are beset, this is really the fallout of all of those policies that you discussed, all of which leads to or have led to the prison industrial complex.
That's right.
And the extraction of black male heads of households.
That's right.
Right? So we have communities that are devoid of black men who were the fathers of many of these young people that are out here creating this mayhem today.
That's right.
And anyone who is doubtful about the social engineering that you speak of, we could really examine the approach that the government and local governments are taking to the recent heroin epidemic, which is completely different.
That's right.
And its approach and its tactics and strategies in dealing with the drug problem that's facing America now. But of course, that population that's affected is a very different population in terms of its major impact. It seemed as though it's white suburbia as opposed to urban and black. But there's another thing that I just kind of want you to speak to in terms of how 20 or 30 years ago, I from what I understand, that most of the organizations that were gang affiliated, they were really focused on trying to generate extra money to support themselves, rather than this kind of chaos and mayhem and just having beefs and broken up. There was an individual that I talked to a few weeks ago that said, look, man, we were the money boys. And that's all our focus was on. We weren't concerned about sticking anybody up and attacking people. We certainly wasn't about violating women. We were just trying to get into the mainstream of the economy because we were locked out. Okay, can you just kind of speak to that too?
Well, quickly, I see we have a caller, but that's very true. I'll say this about that. Whites have always engaged in criminal behavior, but they are allowed to grow out of that. They're allowed to pivot away from that. They're allowed to parlay the fruit of that behavior into legitimate activity. Not that some of them don't go to jail, not that some of them don't lose their life, but in Chicago, when they talk about gangs, you think about black people, even though there are dozens of white gangs in white neighborhoods at this moment engaged in illegal and gangbang activity. But you never hear a discussion of white gangs on any Chicago news station, because they don't allow the general public to be exposed to the truth of white criminality. It is handled completely different, which goes back to what you said before about the prison pipeline, the prison industrial complex. And so we black men particularly, we have a legacy in the United States of America, which is what Colin Kaepernick is protesting, is that we have always been the demon in America. We've always been the monster. We've never had a right to have emotions. We never had a right to be sad or angry or upset. We've always been the monster. And so when you make us the monster, then you sanitize how you treat us. And so even though our behavior may not be any worse than some other ethnic groups' behavior, we get a more severe reaction and response from social policy and public policy.
Yeah, and just to underscore that too, there appears to be the view among white policymakers, particularly prosecutors, to look at black youth as being much older and more mature than white youth. So the prisons are filled with young black children because the punishment is usually more punitive, more harsh, and they just have a different set of challenges as well. I think we only have a few minutes left. You want to go ahead and take the caller that's on the line?
If we still have, yes.
Do we still have the caller?
Yes, I'm on.
Okay. Caller, we only have a few minutes. We really apologize, but can you just make your comment or ask a question very quickly?
Yeah, I want to comment on the statement that the brother Muhammad made there in regards to the federal attacks on the El-Rukns and the Growth and Development and other organizations throughout the city in the late 80s. But you have to understand this is the same approach that was used by the state government in the 70s after the only successful movement by the so-called street organizations, which was LSD. In 1970, which forced the city and the building trades to sign an agreement guaranteeing 4,000 jobs immediately and a quota every month. So we got to get back on the page of letting everybody know that we all got the same fight. Keep the names if you want to, but have the same vision.
Okay.
Thank you.
Very good comment. You wanna
Well, I would just say this. If you're a Teamster, you belong to what used to be considered a pseudo-criminal enterprise. And if you go through the ranks of the unions that belong to the AFL-CIO, many of them have had traditionally very close relationships with what we call mafia, syndicate, outfit, or white male organized crime. And so, so when you draw compare and contrast to this movement the brother spoke of, which was the Lord Stones and Disciples, who were becoming more conscious and wanted to use their numbers to ensure economic progress, the federal government used every tool in their kit to dismantle that kind of effort. And so what he's saying is that's we're still suffering from that same kind of approach from the federal government because of the color of our skin alone. No other reason, because of the color of our skin versus others, Italians, Irish, Polish, who may form their own culture-based organizations to empower themselves or regulate the boundaries of their community. Where they go across the line in criminality is handled differently from the way black men are handled in America. And so we don't, that's why we try not to use the word gang, we use the word street organization.
Because basically what they're doing is taking the avenue that is offered them based upon the condition that they find themselves in socially in the country.
Right.
So everybody aspires for upward mobility. If you are in a condition where the structures of the society and the economy sort of locks you out, you take the avenue that's afforded to you, and that's the avenue that they've taken.
That's right.
And that's the avenue that we've taken, except the response from the government has been much more draconian and protracted, as though the government is the very enemy of the struggle of poor people to create a better opportunity in life for themselves. We have to wrap up now. We certainly thank you for joining us this evening. This was our first show of the season for the Street Peace Coalition. We invite you to come back and join us every week, 7 p.m. on CAN TV. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week.